Hello everyone, this is Oliver Cashman Brown, Assistant Director in the Office of Alumni Relations at the University of Rochester. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Faculty Perspectives. We'd like to thank you for helping to make this program such a great success. Sorry I don't have any background intro music, but you can imagine it for yourselves. Today we will hear from Professor Martha Mock. She will present to us today a talk entitled Rethinking College, Inclusive Higher Education. Professor Mock is the director for the Institute for Innovative Transition based at the University of the Warner School of Education and Human Development. The Institute is made possible by a grant from the D. Thomas Golisano Foundation. For over 20 years, Professor Mock has worked with and been an advocate with people with disabilities and with their families. Under her direction, the Institute has secured grants focusing on adolescent transition for students with disabilities from federal, state, and private foundation funders totaling nearly $7 million. I'd like to remind you all that during the presentation you can post questions through the GoToWebinar software, and Professor Mock will stop at various points through the talk to answer them. I'd now like to introduce you to Professor Mock.
Thank you, Oliver. I really appreciate this opportunity to share with alums and friends of the University of Rochester this great concept, Rethinking College and Inclusive Higher Education. It looks like we have a lot of folks from across the nation as well as from the countries of Colombia and South Korea, so should make for interesting dialogue during the question period. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I wanted to orient you to our mission at the Institute for Innovative Transition before we dive into our topic today. And we began in 2008, and our mission really grew out of a community need that parents and students in our region, as well as across the nation, were talking about related to transition. And when we're talking about transition, we're talking about transition from school into the adult world. And for students with disabilities and intellectual disabilities included, they can be in school up to the age of 21, including a transition plan. So our focus is the age of 12 to 30 years of age. We assist parents, professionals, young adults with intellectual disabilities and other developmental disabilities in finding information related to transition, and have done since 2008, as well as developing community partnerships. So we work with schools as well as colleges, as we'll be talking about today, as well as adult agencies on various issues related to transition to improve the quality of life alongside people with disabilities and their families as well. And I'll be using the term intellectual disability today. That is the preferred term in the field now. We no longer use the term mental retardation, so I just wanted to alert you to that fact. And when we're talking about intellectual disability, we're talking about things like Down syndrome, and sometimes people who have autism have intellectual disabilities, but not always, and sometimes folks who have things like cerebral palsy or other disabilities. So just to give you an idea related to intellectual disability. So we have three goals today in our session together, and the first one is to shift the way we're thinking about people with disabilities who can benefit from college, and identifying the ways in which employment is fostered by attending college, and exploring the experiences students are having on our campus here at the University of Rochester, as well as other campuses across the nation. So our agenda is broken up into three parts and a wrap-up. We're going to have a question and answer slide for you, so feel free to type those questions into Oliver, and he'll be compiling those and putting them together so that we can have a good discussion today. The first part will be highlighting this as a national movement, which has been going on for about 15 years now. Part two will explore how inclusive education actually works, what kinds of support students are receiving, as well as what they're experiencing on campus. And in part three, we'll talk a little bit about employment and the outcomes for students who have intellectual disabilities, as well as how the University of Rochester is participating in this innovative practice. And at the end, as we're wrapping up, I'll tell you a couple of other projects that we're working on as well that may be of interest to you or your families or friends. So I think I decided to begin with, instead of diving into the deep end of of college and intellectual disability, I decided to begin with just a quick overview of how the idea of disability has changed throughout history. And so thinking about people with intellectual disabilities specifically and the amount of discrimination and segregation that historically they may have experienced, we've come a long way in our society in terms of thinking about that. And we've really moved from those concepts of segregation and that separate is better to the next phase, which was what I call tolerance, in terms of thinking about folks being involved in the community, but more in alongside people without disabilities as opposed to being full members and citizens. So we've really now moved in this point in history to what we're calling full inclusion. So in terms of thinking about people with developmental and intellectual disabilities and all disabilities being part of our society, whether it's living in the community, working in the community, or going to college in the community. So while there still may be some old school thinking out there related to disability in terms of various communities in our own country as well as in other countries in the world, we really have come a long way in the last 50 years in terms of thinking about that. That has really been a result of disability advocacy that has come primarily from families and students and people with disabilities themselves. We certainly have had laws that have been put in place, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, the ABLE Act, which most recently passed in December, the ADA, all of those things certainly in our own country have expanded what people with disabilities are able to do and encouraged to do and are required, that we as businesses and schools are required to do. But it's been families, advocates, and students and people with disabilities themselves who have helped to make that happen, and I think that's important to acknowledge that. So we've also moved to a third place in our society related to disability, and thinking about disability as an aspect of diversity. So thinking about it in the same ways that we think about gender diversity, that we think about racial or ethnic diversity, that we think about intellectual diversity and physical diversity in terms of our abilities. So we've really been fortunate, I think, to live in a time where we are coming into disability as an aspect of diversity. I hope you had the opportunity to take a look at the Opportunity Project, which has been part of what we've been doing this year. And if you haven't been able to, we've got those videos now up on our new website, nytransition.org. So feel free to take a look, and you'll see Corey and Robert, who have been pioneers as well as advocates, like I was mentioning before, and both of whom have intellectual disabilities, both who have attended colleges in our region as well as completed certificates in those programs and are now both gainfully employed as well. So I encourage you to take a look at those. So going to college. So why do any of us go to college or encourage our children to go to college? To get a better job, right, is often the answer that I'll hear when I ask this question, to become more independent, both in living as well as hopefully a little more financially independent, or at least able to manage your finances a little more responsibly. Sometimes we learn that after college. And then to also be socializing in the world, learning, getting out of our own hometown or high school or community in terms of thinking about engaging with the larger world. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of any of us going to college or university, in terms of knowing and understanding ideas that are beyond ourselves and our where we have grown up. And engaging in those. So students with intellectual disabilities go to college for all of these same reasons as well, and that'll be important for us to remember as we're talking throughout today. To get a job, to get a better job than they would get just then exiting high school, as well as perhaps making friends, a job network, all of those things that we gain when we're attending college. So I want to be clear about what we're talking about related to an alternative pathway. So the students that we're talking about and the initiatives and programs that we're talking about, which is a nationwide movement, we tend to be talking about students who are entering through an alternative, non-matriculated pathway. So you may be familiar with a matriculated pathway, or traditional pathway as we call it, where folks are now applying online to college, right? Writing their essays as well as declaring what their major is or what they're interested in. And then if they have a disability, they're receiving reasonable accommodations from the office at the college. So what we're not talking about that pathway to college today. What we're talking about is the alternative pathway, where students are entering through a high school partnership or a partnership with an adult agency, or attending on their own. But there is an application process, there is an interview process, and students are obtaining a meaningful credential, and we'll talk a little more about that later in our time together. And then they're receiving individual supports and plans from either their high school, if they're 18 to 21-year-olds, but they're attending college full-time, and disability agency as well as through undergraduate mentors and academic coaches that are here on campus. So let's move to what this actually looks like. So across the nation, students who are on college campuses and have intellectual disabilities are working on campus. They're attending classes. They may be doing that through audit, or they may be doing that through sitting in, or at times students are taking those for credit as well. Students are living in residence halls alongside their peers. When we think about college and we think about where other 18 to 25-ish people are, depending on our education in the program or college where we're thinking about, that's where peers, that's where we can find peers for students who have intellectual disabilities and are interested in pursuing their secondary education, post-secondary education. So what are the options in the United States specifically? There's over 225 options in the United States. 30 of those are comprehensive transition programs, which means that students who are no longer receiving services or supports from their school, their high school, can apply for federal financial aid. And this was new in the 2008 Higher Education Opportunity Act, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. As well as there are 27 funded, which means 43 campuses who were funded by the U.S. Department of Education in 2008 under the Transition and Post-Secondary Program for Students with Intellectual Disabilities. So it's affectionately called TIPSID, another acronym. But there's quite a few also who are not part of either of these initiatives that are part of the U.S. Department of Education, colleges who have committed to doing this independently as well. So here's a map for you, and I see that we have a number of folks from Georgia, Pennsylvania, Texas, Illinois, Minnesota, Florida, Ohio, Massachusetts, and a number of other states that I haven't mentioned are on the call today, which is very exciting. And then it's also important to note that Canada, as well as South Korea and some other Asian countries, have also been engaging in the college options for people with intellectual disabilities in the recent future in South Korea, which has been very exciting. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a picture of what the opportunities are and what those look like. And I also wanted to share with you just a smattering of those 225. So we're in good company. University of Rochester, alongside other Research One institutions, as well as smaller liberal arts colleges, as well as public institutions and community college as well. So we have quite an array of opportunities, which is wonderful. So the Higher Education Opportunity Act was passed in 2008, and this is actually the act that governs what colleges and universities can do and have to do, as it's required. Certain parts of it require certain types of data collection and things like that that are required by the U.S. Department of Education, so that we can continue to evaluate college programs and have accreditation and things like that in our nation. But one of the important things that it did for the first time in 2008 was actually define the meaning of student with an intellectual disability as well as meaningful credential. So there was a portion of the law which was then written into regulation and then was funded, where model demonstration programs, the TIPSIDs that I was referring to, which University of Rochester is one of, as well as a national coordinating center, which is at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And so all of that funding came from this Higher Education Opportunity Act. And within that act, it also outlined what colleges could do related to inclusive higher education in terms of how to think about this concept, and that was the first time that that had occurred. And this is also where the federal financial aid eligibility piece came in. So we're going to pause now and see if there are any questions thus far.
Well, one thing that you mentioned is that the Institute started in 2008, and the Higher Education Opportunity Act was in 2008. Is there a link between that, and can you talk a little bit more about the origins of the Institute? You had also mentioned how about 15 years ago there was a move kind of in the national consciousness towards a redefinition of this type of thought. Can you just talk about that transition and then?
Sure. So it was a coincidence that we both began in 2008, but very fortuitous in terms of thinking about having inclusive higher education part of our mission. So one of the things that parents and students said when we were engaging in a planning process here in our community related to the opportunities that students had or didn't have. And one of the things that students and families said was that they wanted more opportunities in terms of thinking about college and thinking about the ability to go to college despite the fact that they had an intellectual disability, and that they didn't necessarily want to take the traditional pathways, which tended to be more segregated opportunities, things like rehabilitation programs or sheltered workshops, which tended to be some of the opportunities that, that here in New York and across the nation students were offered. Students, because this generation of students have been included for much of their schooling career, as they were exiting, they did not necessarily want to, enter into a segregated environment of some sort. They said, my sister and brother are going to college, my parents went to college, I want to continue my education.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A couple other questions, and again, I want to encourage you all to use the GoToWebinar software to type in your questions as we go along. We'll do a couple more questions now, and then there will be a couple more opportunities along the way to pause for questions. One is, you had mentioned the idea of intellectual disability. A question does come in to ask about how ADHD fits into anything that you're discussing today or fits into these transitions. And then there's another question here that I'll just read out loud because I think it's using some language that's appropriate to this what you're studying that is. I'll just read it. All right. So, not otherwise qualified and otherwise qualified. For auxiliary aids and services, can you speak about this?
Okay. So it sounds like the question may be referring to what colleges are required to provide in terms of thinking about disability supports and service on campus.
Let's
so
there, that.
Right, okay. So there are a set of supports that if students enter through matriculated and pathways and are entering through the traditional door to achieve or to apply to a bachelor's program or to a master's program of any sort, colleges are required to provide supports and services if and when a student declares a disability that meets the criteria of what a disability is. So there's laws that specifically and guidelines and regulations that colleges have to provide. That doesn't include any kinds of modification to the curriculum. It may include, for example, a modification or an accommodation, rather, to an assignment, that kind of thing, but not specifically. And then back to your question related to, or your question about intellectual disability.
Well, the main question was, are students with ADHD part of this discussion, or how does that fit into?
Right. So some students who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder may also have an intellectual disability, but if attention deficit disorder and ADHD is the sole diagnosis, then this is not necessarily, then those students tend to be entering through the matriculated traditional pathways as well. That's not to say that there aren't colleges that we've looked at on the map there who might be supporting students in a different way. And providing them with additional supports, but the primary population we're talking about in this conversation is intellectual disability. Okay, thank you. So continue to send your questions. Thank you very much. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a picture of what is going on specifically in New York as well, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of what inclusive higher education looks like. So here's a map of New York and all of the colleges and universities that are here. There's approximately 200 colleges and universities that are, public, private. This includes community colleges as well. And I like to compare that to this map, which is the map of college options for people with intellectual disabilities in New York State. And if you noticed on the map, the national map, we are certainly one of the states that has one of the highest college options and opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities. And I think that there's a few reasons for that. There's been a number of private colleges as well as public colleges who have really opened their doors to folks with intellectual disabilities and to these partnerships that have developed. But as you can see here, there are a variety in terms of thinking about the regional diversity of where you find college options in New York State as well. And here's the actual list. You can find this list fully on our website. It is in a database, so once you go to our website and you go into the Think College New York tab, if you click there, you can scroll down and you can see all of these colleges and universities. We update that. One of the primary purposes of the Institute is to get information out to families and folks in New York. So we certainly, if you find information that isn't correct, we always appreciate that as well. But do continue to update it every year as more are added, as well as contact information changes. It also will explain to you how you can attend one of these college options in our state as well. So we have information there about what the application process, who the contact person is, all of that information in terms of thinking about those very important details. So I wanted to talk for a minute about our New York State TIFSID, which we provide technical assistance for, and we received the grant for from the U.S. Department of Education, and is also supported by the B. Thomas Golisano Foundation. So we've been charged with working with and have partnered with 3 other colleges in addition to our own to expand what they were already doing or to begin a new initiative. The Monroe Community College Initiative was a new one. Roberts Wesleyan, Keuka College, as well as University of Rochester were participating in these kinds of opportunities prior to 2010, but wanted to expand the kinds of things that students were doing on campus. So prior to 2010, Roberts Wesleyan and University of Rochester, for the most part, students were not auditing or sitting in on any kind of courses as well. They were coming to campus and they were participating in the life of the campus and developing friendships and having some very important interactions and learning that was going on, but all of the folks who were part of those wanted to expand what was going on. So through this partnership, we there are 75 students total every year who participate, and we have approximately 20 to 30 on any given year who are exiting, depending on where they are in the program as well. So here we have again the alternative pathway. So again, I'll remind you, we're talking about the second pathway in terms of the alternative pathway and the individualized supports pathway. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, are there any standards? Are there any benchmarks out there? How are folks doing this? How do they, is there something that holds holds us all together? And the answer is yes, there is. And for approximately 15 years, Think College at University of Massachusetts Boston has been working in this area and has been supporting families and students themselves in this, the concept of going to college, having an intellectual disability. So what they have done and what we have partnered with them to do is to utilize the Think College Standards and Benchmark, which you can find on their website. You can see the link there below. And there's standards and benchmarks and quality indicators in all 4 of these areas related to academic access, what that looks like on campus, career development and the kinds of opportunities that students should be having, as well as self-determination. And if you're not familiar with that term, self-determination is what it sounds like in terms of being able to have choice, being able to be involved in decision making, and advocating for yourself as well as others oftentimes, as well as campus membership in terms of thinking about participating in clubs, intramural sports or other sports, and social activities, and living on campus. So the other piece that is important to remember about this graphic is the how of how this occurs. So one of the things that we have done here at University of Rochester, as well as at the other colleges that we've been working with specifically, is to think about not developing separate strategies or separate systems, but to utilize the systems that are already in place at our college in terms of thinking about students having IDs, students being able to access classes and sign up to audit or be involved in classes. We also coordinate and collaborate with local school districts as well as with the disability support agencies, places like ARC, places like Lifetime Assistance locally. We're always thinking about sustainability. This is something that if we are weaving these concepts into the fabric of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis at the university or college, then this kind of initiative is not going to leave when a faculty member leaves, or when the person at the administrative level who was a champion for this kind of initiative moves on or takes another job. So it's very important in terms of thinking about sustainability. And then of course ongoing evaluation in terms of thinking about what we're really doing, and also what kinds of things we need to be thinking about in terms of getting feedback from students frequently. So I just wanted to show you quickly one of the standards, the career development standard. This has been one. We utilize all 8 standards, but this has been one specifically that we have utilized in the past few years in terms of increasing the employment opportunities that students have on campus, as well as the career development opportunities they have off campus. So what are students doing on campus? So we have a number of students who are involved in a variety of classes, and people are often interested in what kind of classes are we talking about. And we're talking about everything from introduction to business, to criminology, to human development, psychology, African dance, American Sign Language, history of sports, sociology, digital publishing, English, so lots of various departments and lots of various courses at all of the colleges. So not only are students attending classes, sometimes they're attending with the support of an academic coach or a mentor. And this academic coach or mentor tends to be a traditional undergraduate student who's interested in supporting a student in class. They may or may not be taking the class themselves, and there's always training that the academic coaches and mentors receive in terms of thinking about learning and teaching and how to best support somebody. So that's very, very helpful as well. And then students are also working on campus, as you can see from the photos, as well as working off campus and also living on campus. In New York State, we have only a couple of residential opportunities, unfortunately, but there are other states who have a number of residential opportunities. Here is another map of our nation from Think College National, and this actually focuses on the Comprehensive Transition Program. Those folks who have gone through the U.S. Department of Education criteria, the certification process, which means that students who are either over the age of 21 and or students who have left high school and who are attending a CTP-approved college are able to access certain types of financial aid. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those types of financial aid are in a few minutes. But I wanted to give you an idea of where those are located as well. And this also brings up the ever, what's the right word for that? The ever-present question of how are they paying for it, right? How is anyone paying for college? So financial aid is one way, but these students, like any other student, it is on the basis of income and based on family income. As well. And then there are some private colleges and universities are waiving the tuition or the audit fees. Whenever students are taking classes for credit, though, they are, and most colleges are required to pay for that, ours included, because if you read, or to get a scholarship to attend or utilize financial aid. But that's one of the other ways that students are paying for that as well. So earning a credential, and here's where we'll talk a little bit more about the federal financial aid types of aid that folks can receive, and then we'll take a few more questions after this. So earning a credential, one of the things that with the enactment of the Higher Education Opportunity Act in 2008 that advocates and colleges wanted to make sure was in there was related specifically to a meaningful credential. So when a student is attending a program or an initiative or part of a college who is opening their doors to students with intellectual disabilities, one of the things that we wanted to make sure happened was that students were exiting with something, not just something that we're printing out on our printers saying that they've, attended a couple classes or completed a certain number of hours, but actually putting value to that so that we can also raise the profile and the level of how employers and how businesses are understanding this experience when students are exiting. Because we understand, it's somewhat common knowledge what getting a bachelor's degree means in terms of typically it means 4 years if you're going full-time. Typically it means a certain number of credits in a certain area, maybe a minor, those kinds of things. So we sort of, in our society, have our heads wrapped around that. So one of the pieces that we're working on developing, as well as accreditation standards related to programming, is the earning a credential. So it's a very young field, and I think that that's one of the things that we have to remember as we're moving along, but we're getting there. So students, when we are talking about a credential, and when colleges are developing comprehensive transition programs for the federal financial aid purposes, students are required to participate in classes, so alongside their same-age peers. So this can look a number of ways, as I mentioned, sitting in courses, auditing courses. Some students are taking them for credit. It also involves some form of internship hours. This is, could be called something different depending on the college that you're attending. But the idea is related specifically to employment in terms of thinking about those opportunities and what those look like and accruing clock hours for that, as well as co-curricular and campus involvement hours. So thinking about being involved in the life of the campus depending on, and that varies widely, depending on the culture of the campus and depending on what's available as well. So for the Comprehensive Transition Program qualification, as I mentioned, there's over 30, and you saw the map, there's over 30 approved in our nation so far, that there are three types of federal financial aid that students can receive: Pell Grants, work study, as well as a type of high need aid. And I'll have a link for you at the end of the presentation which will lead you to the Federal Financial Aid website if you're interested in looking at what that means. And students do not need to have graduated from high school. They do not need to have earned a traditional high school diploma in order to participate in a CTP, and that's a very important distinction because that's often the case when you are attending college, but that is not the case for students with intellectual disabilities. This is a requirement that has been waived because oftentimes students, when they've attended high school, they receive something like an IEP diploma or an IEP certificate at times. So they haven't had the opportunity necessarily to achieve a diploma, and the advocates, as well as those who have participated in initiatives like this, did not want that standing in the way of students being able to have a meaningful experience and earn a credential. So we'll take a few more questions.
So again, I encourage you all out there to continue typing in your questions, and I do apologize if I misinterpret or botch your question a little bit. The next round of questions I'm dividing into kind of two categories. One is the learning experience on campus, and one is the campus life experience on campus. The first one for the learning experience is, this comes from a listener, how can deficiencies in education and social growth during younger years be effectively taken care of when they come to college or in the college environment?
Right, in the college environment. So in terms of thinking about, and actually one of our speakers, and you'll be able to, she was a keynote speaker for an event we held in November. We hold an annual conference. Claire Bible speaks very eloquently about this very thing in terms of thinking about the opportunities that she has had in her life. So she's a young woman who is in her late 20s who has an intellectual disability herself, and she participated fully with the, put at the advocacy and pushing of her parents in her, inclusively throughout her high school career as well as her middle school and elementary career. And she talks specifically about, the need to do that, but that if you haven't had that opportunity, that not everybody had either within their school district that opportunity or the advocacy that they may have needed in order to be able to be fully included throughout their, K-12 schooling, that it's never too late in terms of thinking about the kinds of opportunities that there are at a college in terms of exposure to ideas as well as getting the support that students need. So one of the colleges that we work with locally supports some students who have very significant disabilities, but who had, in the past not at all had the opportunity to attend college, but they continue to gain skills in terms of especially social interaction, but also related to their own thinking about themselves as a learner, in terms of learning what kinds of supports they need, if that wasn't something that they learned in high school or learned in their K-12 career, being able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Along the same lines then with campus life, what are the common challenges or difficulties with campus life that IDD students have in college? And related to that, how are campus staff trained, campus staff like resident advisors and academic counselors, etc., trained to support this population?
Right. I have a colleague at UCLA, Eric Latham, who speaks very eloquently on this topic in terms of how students are supported, because I think one time I heard him present, and he was talking, and the title of the presentation was "Be Careful What You Ask For," in terms of residential, because residential options. So I think that students with intellectual disabilities, are struggling with the same kinds of things that any student who is living on campus in a residential setting are struggling with. They're struggling with adjustment issues. Any college student, first time being away from home, is struggling at various points, as well as learning to organize their own lives. So it may be that students with intellectual disabilities have a little bit of additional support. One of our colleges that we work with related to the TIPSID initiative, Keuka College, did have about a one-year residential opportunity for students at the time who had intellectual disabilities. And one of the most interesting things about that was that they set up all sorts of supports for the student. And And then so in terms of thinking about, because I think some of the residential folks were afraid, what happens if, what happens if, what happens if? Well, many of the residential support staff and residential life staff and, within Dean of Students offices and things like that are very well versed in terms of they have seen a lot of, have been challenged with a lot of things related to residential life. And actually none of those things came true for this individual who was living on campus at all. And he said, because he was required to check in every few hours or something like that in terms of the residential support, and he actually refused to. He said, no, I'm fine. I have my phone. If you need to reach me, I'm a college student. I'll be at the library, or I'll be in the cafeteria and or socializing with my friends. But so not to make light of it, but there may be some specific training that folks may receive at colleges, but it tends to be really within the realm of what's going on in residential life anyway.
So just one more on this topic. To go back about academic support, are students able to receive more time for tests or copies of class notes, recordings of lectures, typical college accommodations under 504? Have you been able to negotiate this with colleges?
So the short answer is yes, that they are. Oftentimes with this type of initiative, and this is true across the nation, it's not necessarily the disability, the Office of Disability Supports on a college campus that's providing these supports for students. It's either an outside agency or a school district or someone that's been hired by the individual student or by someone who's coordinating the initiative at the college level, and that there has been some sort of negotiation process that has occurred related to the the Office of Students with Disability Services. So students are able to receive additional time if they need. So they certainly are able to receive everything under 504 and then some, because of the way the initiative is set up in terms of how they receive that. So thank you for your questions. So we're going to dive into a couple slides about employment in terms of employment as a paid employment as an outcome and why it's important for students with intellectual disabilities to attend college. And then we're also going to touch base quickly on what's happening here at University of Rochester specifically. And then we'll take some more questions at that point. So this is a study that was actually conducted utilizing national data from the vocational rehabilitation agencies who provide supports to people with all types of disabilities. But this specifically was focused specifically on students with intellectual disabilities. And what it showed was that students who participated in a post-secondary education, or inclusive higher education as we're calling it now, they were 26% more likely to leave the supports, the vocational rehabilitation supports, with paid employment had they had some form of college experience, even if they hadn't gone for more than one semester. That one semester was better than nothing in terms of thinking about that, as well as earning a 73% higher weekly income. This is from the Partnerships in Employment, which is a national initiative that's supported by the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and this actually speaks specifically to, New York is a good test case, if you will, in terms of looking at the difference amongst youth who are employed, and this comes from the American Community Survey, and this report is from the University of Massachusetts Boston Institute for Community Inclusion. But as you can see, where the first arrow is there, pointing to the 14, the percentage of students who are between the ages of 16 and 21 who are employed. So that 32% of students are employed who don't have disabilities, and 14% of the students are employed who have cognitive disabilities, and they chose the term cognitive disabilities in this study. And those students are also making the least amount of money when it actually comes down to it as well, but they're working a similar number of hours. So when we think about citizenship, and we think about disability, and we think about becoming a full participant, part of that in our society means working, and it means doing that in a way that you're going to be able to sustain yourself. And oftentimes for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that has not been the case in the past, but that this opportunity helps lead towards that. So we do have one of the things that has been, prior to 2010, when the TIPSID programs began, we did not have a national database that actually was able to collect information specifically about college initiatives. So we now have that, and we've been at each one of our own colleges entering that information, and the TIPSID National Coordinating Center has been putting that information together, and there'll be a report out soon on our Year 4 information. This is from past years related to paid employment. But I think one of the most interesting statistics, and you may think, gosh, 30%, that doesn't seem like a lot, but the national average of a student who's actually exiting college who has gone through a bachelor's program, 36%, I think, is, it may be slightly higher now, but 36% at exit have a job. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us are getting our jobs, including students with intellectual disabilities, after we've exited and are continuing in the field as well. We've partnered with Transcend, which is a nonprofit organization that provides technical assistance to folks. And this has been one of the things that students said to us related to wanting to have more employment opportunities on the colleges that we were working with, on the college campuses that we were working with. And so one of the things that we've done is been partnered with Transcend, and Amy Dwyer from their organization has been providing technical assistance to our colleges, and it's been very helpful in terms of thinking about raising expectations, because at times folks with disabilities as well, especially folks with intellectual disabilities, have not been held to high standards when it comes to employment, and they have not necessarily had opportunities outside sort of the more traditional types of jobs that you may have met someone who has a job and an intellectual disability in terms of thinking about the fields that they've been limited to, is what I'm trying to say, that we're really thinking beyond that, way beyond that now, which is very helpful. So what's happening here at the University of Rochester? So the University of Rochester, we have a partnership with Monroe BOCES 1, and BOCES is a collective education system in the state of New York, and so it means that, and it's publicly funded, and school districts who are within that region, as well as school districts outside of that region, students are able to access the partnerships that BOCES establishes. And we have also partnered with Lifetime Assistance, which is a disability supports and services agency here, and they provide job coaching to students who are attending here on our campus. So we have 22 students who are on campus, and the initiative is called Tour, and 16 are taking U of R courses this spring, which is very exciting. That's our highest number ever. We began with 0 and initially, and have made great progress, and the students are working very hard. They have academic coaches. There are 11 academic coaches who are paid through the TIPSID grant currently, and we're working on a sustainability model for that past the end of the grant. We're in year 5 now, which is the final year. There's also a student-led group of social mentors, and there's also mentors that students have had from the psychology department, which has been a wonderful support to them as well. But students are taking the college classes and are able to receive like we mentioned, the traditional 504 accommodations, but also beyond that in terms of thinking about some modifications to assignments and things like that. So what are students saying? So I will only read one of these quotes. I'll leave you to read the others as we move through. So I have some quotes from students as well as faculty and as well as some of the student mentors themselves. I'll read the one at the bottom there. When I found out I got into this program, I was overwhelmed. I never knew I could be in college, but now that I'm at college, it's just unbelievable in the experiences and discoveries and the opportunities I've been able to have. So I think that really speaks to not only students at our own college, but students at other colleges who have been able to achieve their dream. And I love the quote on the bottom from one of the academic coaches here at the University of Rochester. It's an excellent opportunity for both the mentor and the student. Mentors learn to help students learn to set goals, gain useful information and engage themselves in experiences which prepare them for the jump leading up to their adult lives. And it's been interesting also because I think that as we have had academic mentors and coaches who they're receiving ongoing weekly support and training in order to support students, they have learned a lot about their own learning styles, and about how they learn as well, as we're deconstructing sort of adult learning ideas and topics. So it's been very meaningful to them. As well as one of the questions that has come out in a presentation that I did a few months ago was whether or not the students at the University of Rochester who were the academic mentors or other students felt as if because having students with intellectual disabilities on campus that their experience was lessened. And so it's a kind of a hard question that was asked, but it's one that at times comes up in people's mind, and it has been unequivocally answered by the students when we've put that question to them in terms of what do they think, and they've said absolutely not. I like having this diversity on the campus. I think that's wonderful. I like going to a place that has a lot of diversity, including intellectual diversity, and this partnership with a community that allows students with intellectual disabilities to go to college. And what are faculty saying? So faculty, and some of these quotes are from University of Rochester faculty, some of them are from a couple of our other partners, but the third one down, the class seems to embrace the student and have a positive experience. At times, the student's forthright observations are refreshing. You just have to be on your toes and answer honestly. So I think what that professor is referring to is that at times, the student who was in his class or her class was, was asking, wasn't holding back and was asking a question that maybe others had, but wasn't as willing to answer or ask. And faculty and staff have also received training, Universal Design for Learning training. We have an initiative at the University of Rochester as well as the other colleges that has been helpful in terms of supporting faculty. So we're going to hear real quickly from Claire Bible, who is the keynote speaker that I mentioned, who is really going to frame for us what this initiative as well as other colleges have been doing. Oh, yes, thank you. I'll put the volume. Okay, volume is up, and we are good.
So if you're not afraid to make changes, to rattle the cage and say, hey, it isn't what it should be different, it can be different, it is different, go for it. Now the revolution is kids with disabilities going to college and having their opportunities. And I just really want to stoke those flames and get that fire, that revolution really going, because this is where the revolution begins. It begins now. It begins with us.
So I think that I would encourage you also to go on the thinkcollege.net website. You can view the whole film, which is only about 25 minutes long, and meet 5 or 6 students from across the country who have attended college and who have very similar experiences to Claire's. And you can hear about courses they've taken as well as hear interviews with their families, as well as some leaders in the field, Deborah Hart and Meg Griegel and Kate Weir, that we work with here at the University of Rochester. Mm-hmm. So we have time for...
Yeah, in the interest of time, I will, let's just go to the next part for your presentation, and any outstanding questions I can give to Martha and with your email address, and she can answer them directly.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody's willingness to participate and ask great questions today. So in terms of thinking about how you can stay connected to us and to also the idea of inclusive higher education and what's going on both in New York at University of Rochester as well as nationally, feel free to contact us either by our web page, Facebook. We also have listservs that we send out information on frequently. but not too frequently, which is always important when you're on the listserv. We also have a new publication if you want to hear from more students, and it's entitled Let's Talk About College, and there's quotes from students in there, and it goes in a little more detail about what we talked about today, but you can hear directly from them as well. And also, introducing this idea to those you know. I think one of the things, I was at a school expo on Saturday with Rochester City School District, and as we were talking about this initiative, and some people would come up and say, well, what are you doing? And we would talk about this. And they would say, oh, well, that's not my son or daughter, or that's not me. And I'd say, well, that's okay, but you may know somebody who may benefit. So I think that one of the, just getting the word out that going to college is an option for students with intellectual disabilities is one of the most important things that you can do in your own community. So here are a few places that you can find out more. Our own website, as well as the Think College National website. If you're interested in finding out about the most recently passed ABLE Act, which also includes the ability to save, which is important in terms of thinking about how to pay for college for students with disabilities, as well as the financial aid information. So I want to quickly tell you about what else we do. So Think College is one of our major initiatives and a very important one and one of the cornerstones of what we do at the Institute. But we also provide community education and engagement to local folks as well as folks across the state, and transition information and referral to families specifically. And back to Think College New York, I receive calls from folks all over the nation. And if I can't answer them, I oftentimes know who can, or can connect with our national network of folks in specific states. So feel free to have folks contact us, as well as other countries too. Our reach, so since 2008, we've trained over 2,500 individuals. You can take a look at the other numbers there. We've been, highly active and successful in terms of also thinking about bringing in other grants and other projects, and we'll continue to do so. Two things I wanted to share with you before we go to a screenshot of our website. In the driver's seat is a project that we worked on within this past year, and that's actually designed for parents as well as students with disabilities who may be applying for DD supports in their state. So we worked with two parents here to provide information in a user-friendly fashion and get that out to folks, as well as partnered with Ninka Dosa, who is a doctor at Upstate Medical, and on the Healthy Transitions website. So in terms of thinking about the other kinds of transitions that there are out there, pediatric to adult health care is one of the big ones. And if you have needs in that area, or families that you work with or interest, and here is our website, as well as my contact information. So I welcome you to call as well as email or connect with us, and I really appreciate your joining us today. Yes.
Thank you very much, Martha. And I wanted to thank our audience for your questions and for your participation. We are hoping to archive this. We'll just make sure that it comes out technically okay, and we can share the archive with you so that you can write down some of the websites and things like that. And again, any questions that we missed, I'll provide those to Martha, and she can contact you directly. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Faculty Perspectives. I want to thank Professor Mock one more time for sharing her time with us today. We hope that you enjoy this opportunity to learn more about this important work. Please join us for our future Faculty Perspectives webinars on January 28th. Jim Zavislan will present a talk called Optical Biopsy, Bringing Real-Time Cellular Imaging to Clinical Care. And then on February 12th, Dina Swanson will present a talk called Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, Social Justice, and the Black Experience in America. Look for an upcoming email with more information on how to sign up. And thank you very much, and enjoy your day.